U.S. Navy-guided missile destroyer attacked and seized one of its cargo ships.
The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations denies. President Trump says a U.S. team is heading to Pakistan for talks with Iran.
Southern Karad. Vera Reach, Nama Strait. 0.9 kilometers from the Black Mouth choke point. 2:06 in the morning. 48 Grey Tide Rangers from the 9th Littoral Regiment faced a 132-man Tauric maritime guard garrison. Two objectives sat inside one compound tonight: detain Commodore Saren Vok and disable the Kevlar tidal relay before the Coast Wing and patrol flotillas could seal the strait in 26 minutes. Commodore Saren Vok was the Tauric officer who coordinated interdiction patrols, beacon spoofing, and convoy harassment across the Nama Strait, and he had directed 41 maritime seizure operations in the last 5 years. The Kevlar tidal relay processed channel surveillance, powered range-finding towers, and synchronized pier fueling, which allowed Tauric patrol craft to move, refuel, and close the strait on command. Both targets were reachable tonight because signals intercepts placed Vok at a scheduled inspection inside the relay complex during a maintenance shift when the backup security grid was still cycling offline. 48 Rangers, two objectives, one compound, 26 minutes. The Kevlar complex stood on a poured concrete shelf above black water, with fuel tanks on the seaward side, a relay spine in the center, a command loft above the operations hall, and a buried backup reactor hall behind a line of blast walls. Steel walkways linked the storage yard, the control room, the pipeline junction, and the power block, while flood masts and sensor poles watched the docks and the road from the mainland. Vok was known to be inside the upper command loft tonight, reviewing traffic plots over the central map table before crossing to the fuel pier annex. The Tauric Maritime Guard protected the site with Dravik 12.7 repeaters, Run 23 twin mounts, Kelm support nests, AV-11 carbines, Breach 6 launchers, Morat wire-guided lances, and Scar fast cutters in the water with deck guns ready. Tauric Command believed Vok was safe here because the shelf could only be reached by sea under watched water or by road through two gate belts and overlapping tower fire. They considered the relay unreachable because any attacker had to hit the command loft and the 4 shutdown points before the harbor grid closed. If both objectives were completed, Tauric Command would lose its strait coordinator and the relay that made its patrol network coherent in the same night. The Rangers had to run 2 tasks in parallel and they had to finish them on the same clock. Charlie Element had to reach Vok before any base warning moved him into the buried transit tunnel or out to the emergency dock. Bravo Element had to plant vector strip charges on the facility's 4 critical points before internal shutters sealed the tanks, the command loft, the relay spine, and the backup reactor hall. If Charlie slowed, Vok vanished. If Bravo slowed, the relay hardened and Charlie lost the reason to stay inside. Bravo carried vector strip charges, pulse cutters, and breaker wedges for the shutdown work. Charlie carried M18C carbines, sable sidearms, flash discs, door wedges, and a compact ram for the close quarters task. Coalition planners divided the Rangers into 4 elements. Alpha Element would breach the perimeter and create entry using suppressed M18C carbines, cutter charges, and shock wedges. Bravo Element would reach facility demolition points with M18C carbines and vector strip charges to disable storage, control room, relay spine, and backup power systems. Charlie Element would reach the commander's location using M18C carbines, sable sidearms, flash discs, and a compact ram to detain Commodore Saren Vok. Delta Element would hold the perimeter and engage naval assets using M240L support guns, Archer 4 anti-vehicle launchers, and shoreline reconnaissance drones. Both Bravo and Charlie had to reach their objectives at the same moment. The plan had no margin for delay. At 2:06, Alpha crossed the outer wire under rain mist and harbor noise, and suppressed M18C fire cut down the first tower lamps before the gate sentry could trigger the hard alarm. A cutter charge opened the seaward service fence, and shock wedges forced the maintenance door behind the tank line. 2 Tauric guards answered with AV-11 carbine fire from the catwalk and fell back toward the relay yard. Alpha cleared the entry lane, marked it with dim strobes, and opened the compound. 3 minutes into the operation, Bravo and Charlie split inside the dark service corridor and took opposite directions under the same clock. Bravo turned toward the storage yard and the command loft feeds with vector strip charges packed tight against their armor. Charlie moved inland toward the operations hall while Delta stayed outside and laid M240L lanes across the coastal road. Tauric guards in the first barracks block heard the breach, grabbed AV-11 carbines, and started moving, but the split was already complete. At 2:10, Bravo reached the first shutdown point at the base of the western storage manifold and locked a vector strip charge along the access seam. A Kelm support nest above the fuel pipes opened with hard tracer lines and forced Bravo flat behind pipe saddles. Bravo answered with M18C bursts and a breaker wedge into the nest support, dropping the gun team off the catwalk. The first charge armed and the path to the control room opened. 6 minutes into the operation, Charlie moved toward the command building and found Vok's personal security detail posted deeper than intelligence had placed them. 6 Tauric bodyguards held the inner stairwell with AV-11 carbines and 1 Dravik 12.7 repeater pointed down the hall. Charlie threw a flash disc through a side office, shifted left through the smoke, and used M18C fire to cut one flank away from the repeater. The security detail gave ground by meters, not by rooms, and Charlie lost time before reaching the stairwell. At 2:13, the base alarm finally triggered and the whole complex came alive at once. Floodlights snapped across the pier, shutters started cycling over internal doors, and Run 23 mounts slewed toward the dark water beyond the tanks. Alpha heard the siren, pushed through the maintenance block with suppressed M18C fire, and shot the relay panel that controlled the next barrier. Tauric fighters poured out of the barracks and the operation shed, but the inner perimeter was already compromised. 9 minutes into the operation, Delta saw the first Tauric reinforcement truck racing down the coastal road from the mainland checkpoint. An Archer 4 anti-vehicle launcher fired from a low revetment and hit the truck ahead of the front axle, flipping it across the road and into the drainage wall. The second truck braked hard, and Tauric troops jumped out under the cover of its engine block with AV-11 carbines ready. The road partly closed, and the first outside reinforcement stalled where Delta needed it. At 2:16, Charlie made first contact inside the central corridor outside the operations hall, where a Kelm support nest had been dragged into position behind a steel desk line. The gun opened on the corridor with short, flat bursts while bodyguards with Sable machine pistols worked the side doors. Charlie answered with M18C carbines and a flash disc that bounced off the wall into the desk cluster. The blast blinded the front line long enough for Charlie to push through the choke point and reach the inner stairs. 11 minutes into the operation, the first burst from the Kelm support nest cut across the stair landing and one Ranger from Charlie went down immediately. Charlie answered with M18C carbine fire and a flash disc through the upper doorway. The nest stopped firing, and the squad kept moving. At 2:18, Bravo completed the second demolition point inside the control room annex after forcing a sealed hatch with a pulse cutter. 2 Tauric technicians tried to lock the relay from their consoles while 3 guards fired AV-11 carbines from behind the instrument racks. Bravo used M18C bursts to clear the racks, planted a second vector strip charge beneath the main relay cradle, and severed the panel trunk with a breaker wedge. 2 of 4 points were set, and Bravo turned toward the relay spine. 14 minutes into the operation, Alpha pushed deeper to reinforce Charlie through the service bridge above the pump hall. Tauric defenders on the bridge fired AV-11 carbines from both ends and tried to pin Alpha between the railings. Alpha used suppressed M18C fire on one side and a breaching wedge on the far door hinge, folding the angle in its favor and clearing the passage. A captured runner shouted that Vok was still inside the main building, and Charlie got the confirmation it needed. At 2:21, Tauric quick reaction forces arrived from outside the complex in greater numbers than the intercepts had predicted. Fighters crossed the eastern apron in loose groups, one team hauling a Morat wire-guided lance and another dragging ammo crates toward the Run 23 pit. Delta shifted a shoreline drone overhead, called the movement, and raked the apron edge with M240L fire to delay the massing. Tauric troops still reached the outer wall in enough numbers to turn the compound into a full perimeter fight. 17 minutes into the operation, 2 Scar fast cutters broke from the strait and drove toward the facility pier on parallel wakes. Delta swung an Archer 4 launcher toward the lead cutter and fired as the boat lined up its deck gun. The missile hit the bow quarter, snapped the craft sideways, and shoved it burning into the pier piles. The second cutter kept coming through spray and debris, and the water approach stayed contested. At 2:24, the second Scar cutter opened deck gun fire on Delta's revetment and chewed concrete off the seawall with fast, bright strikes. Delta answered with M240L fire and another Archer 4 shot, but the cutter's turn spoiled the angle and the missile missed wide over black water. 2 Rangers in Delta were hit by splintering stone and metal fragments, and one was carried behind the wall in critical condition. The cutter kept firing until Alpha reached a side overlook and drove it off with concentrated M18C fire at the exposed helm box. 20 minutes into the operation, Charlie breached the main building stair door under pressure from 2 surviving bodyguards and guards shifting down from aloft. A compact ram broke the latch, flash discs went through the opening, and M18C carbines fired on the move as Charlie entered the upper map room. Tauric officers inside tried to pull Vok through a side exit toward the tunnel access, but the flash discs broke that movement and trapped them in the room. Charlie reached the command floor at the same time Bravo hit the relay spine passage. At 2:27, Charlie overran the command loft in hard, close bursts and reached Vok beside the central plotting table. One bodyguard fired a Sable machine pistol from behind a display wall, and Charlie answered with M18C fire that cleared the corner. Vok was dropped, restrained, and pulled off the maproom floor while 2 Rangers dragged the wounded back toward the stair. Charlie had the commander, but the exit route was already narrowing under fire from below. 23 minutes into the operation, Bravo reached the relay spine, where the third shutdown point sat behind a mesh of pipework and armored conduits above the buried backup hull. Taurik guards blocked the approach with AV-11 carbines from the far catwalk and one Breach 6 launcher from a maintenance hatch. Bravo used M18 Ceasefire to suppress the hatch, cross the catwalk in pairs, and locked a third vector strip charge onto the spine junction. The backup reactor hall remained farther in, behind a descending corridor now filling with defenders. At 2:30, Bravo pushed toward the fourth point and found the backup power approach fully blocked by shuttered blast doors and concentrated Taurik fire from the lower hall. A Morat wire-guided lance team tried to angle a shot up the corridor while two Kelm support nests locked the stairs flat. Bravo threw breaker wedges at the upper rail and fired M18C carbines at the exposed nest crews, but the lower door never opened and the lane never cleared. 3 of 4 charges were set, the fourth was abandoned, and Bravo turned back for extraction. 26 minutes into the operation, the Rangers began consolidating under fire across 3 connected corridors and 1 exposed bridge. Charlie moved out with Vok restrained and the wounded carried by strap handles while Alpha folded back from the pump hall to cover the withdrawal. Taurik troops pressed from the barrack side with AV-11 carbines and from the pier side with a Run 23 mount firing through broken railings. The Rangers kept moving, but the pace dropped to the speed of the wounded and the prisoner. At 2:33, a Taurik vehicle column reached the outer perimeter from the mainland road, 6 trucks in staggered order with fighters standing in the beds. Delta and Alpha engaged at once with M240L fire and Breaker, 8 recoilless tubes from opposite angles. The first truck lost its front axle, the second took a hit through the engine casing, and the third rolled into the shoulder under machine gun fire. Taurik troops jumped clear from the remaining vehicles and tried to push on foot toward the inner gate. 29 minutes into the operation, 3 vehicles were burning on the coastal road and the rest of the column dismounted into the culvert line. Taurik fighters answered with AV-11 carbines and a Morat wire-guided lance that struck the gatehouse wall instead of the Ranger withdrawal lane. Alpha used suppressed M18C fire from the maintenance roof while Delta worked M240L bursts across the culvert exits. The dismount stayed dangerous, but the Rangers were already inside the extraction corridor and moving toward the seaward breach. At 2:35, Bravo triggered the vector timers as the last teams crossed the storage yard and passed the tank shadow where the entry had begun. Taurik guards saw the withdrawal and surged after them with AV-11 carbines, trying to force contact before the charges went off. Alpha planted one last shock wedge on the service door frame and dropped the rear barrier behind the formation. The timers were live, the corridor was sealed, and every second now favored the team that was leaving. 31 minutes into the operation, the first detonations rolled through the facility in sequence rather than all at once. The western storage manifold split open, the control room annex collapsed into its own consoles, and the relay spine burst upward in a line of fire and fractured conduit. Taurik troops inside the yard scattered under falling metal, and the command loft caught from below as severed fuel and power feeds ignited. The backup reactor hall did not go, and 1/4 of the power block still stood behind the blast wall. At 2:37, the burning command building threw sparks across the pier while the surviving Run 23 mount fired blindly through smoke toward the seawall. Delta answered with M240L fire and finally silenced the mount as the last casualty teams crossed the breach lane. Taurik fighters still on the inner road tried to reform around the reactor access and hold what remained of the facility grid. They kept one power sector alive, but they lost the control architecture that bound the complex together. 33 minutes into the operation, the last Ranger element cleared the kill zone and moved down the rock shelf to the extraction craft waiting low against the tide. Taurik small arms fire chased them off the wall, but Alpha and Delta answered with M18C carbines and M240L bursts until the final man crossed. One shoreline drone stayed overhead long enough to confirm no pursuit craft left the pier after the burning cutter blocked the berth. Extraction was complete, and the Nama Strait lost 1 commander and most of 1 relay in the same hour. The Grey Tide Rangers lost 4 soldiers killed and 11 wounded. Taurik Maritime Guard forces suffered 126 killed, 71 wounded, and 18 captured. Commodore Saren Vok was captured alive. 3 of 4 facility shutdown objectives were completed. The backup power systems were not destroyed. Facility damage was valued at $418 million. Vok's network lost its operational head. Vok controlled Taurik harassment patrols, signal deception, and seizure coordination across the Nama Strait, and the Kevar tidal relay gave those operations power, tracking, and fuel discipline at the choke point. The Rangers took the commander, broke the storage manifold, collapsed the control room, and wrecked the relay spine. But they could not reach the buried backup reactor hall before the lower corridor sealed under concentrated fire. It cost the 9th Littoral Regiment 4 killed and 11 wounded to hit both targets in one night and leave the Strait command structure cut open at its center. The 9th Littoral Regiment entered the Nama Strait, removed a command node from the waterway, and changed what every ship in that channel had to measure from then on.
made the operation truly remarkable. Two F-35B Lightning II fighters from the USS Abraham Lincoln, using their advanced sensors, the stealth jets fed real-time. The Rangers had established strong defensive lines on the high ground.
Arrived in the Western Pacific 11 days ago through the Suez Canal across
The 30mm M230 chain guns rattled continuously, sending streams of high-explosive rounds into Iranian ground. The Iranian naval base on the northern shore. The Lightning operation has given American forces direct important military installations in the region, severely weakening Tehran's
the Indian Ocean and through the Malacca Strait, conducting what the Israeli Navy
destroyed several mobile coastal radar units that had been feeding targeting data. The first group of international oil tankers that had been under the protection of American forces. Shipping companies reported a sudden sense of relief as back at the Forward Command Center, the Joint Operations Commander received confirmation from both units. He looked at the updated map showing green icons where Iranian threats once stood and said, "They did exactly what we needed them to do," to Iranian forces.
long-range navigation exercise. They docked briefly at Yokosuka Naval Base. They resupplied, and then they quietly slotted into the Ford's formation,